In today's video, we will be creating this really cool sidebar which I created using Figma, but in today's video, we'll be coding it using React. This tutorial consists of different hooks that we'll be using, as well as SASS, which will be used for the styling component. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Before we get into the tutorial, there's a couple things that you're going to need. The first one are these two folders here, the images folder, as well as the styles folder. These can be accessed on my link in the description, which will take you to my website. And on my website, you'll get access to the GitHub link. And then this is where you can download the images folder as well as styles to follow along with the video. Secondly, the next thing we want are two plugins. The first one is the SASS plugin. So we'll just install that. The next one we want to install is something called the React Router DOM. So what the React Router DOM does is it allows us to have multiple pages without the application crashing. Awesome. And the final thing we want is this font here. You can search it up on Google Fonts, or again, go into my link in the description. These are the two weights we'll be using, 600 and 800. So we'll just come over here, copy this link here. Once you've selected them, of course, and then go into the index.html under the head here, just paste that in there and save it. All right, perfect. So now that's working, and we'll get back into the React app. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is come into the app.js file here, and I like to change it to JSX since it works with the syntax of the plugins that I have. The next thing you want to do is to delete this header here since we no longer need it, and then also delete this logo. And we also want to import the main.scs file. So go $/style/main.scss. And just to make sure that's working, we'll go into the main.scss and then go body, background color. Let's change it to red. Yeah, it's working. Okay, cool. Okay, now we can start to work with putting everything in place. So the first thing we want to do is to create a new folder, and we want to call it pages. The reason for this is because if we come over here, we have a couple different pages that we want to change. And again, this is supported by using the React Router DOM. In order to get the React Router DOM in, we want to first import the browser router as router. We also want routes, and finally route from React Router DOM. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that in place, and then we can start working with the pages. Okay, cool. So once you've got your pages made, the next thing we want to do is come into one of them, type in IAFCE, and this will create this syntax for you. And in the div, just create a H1 and we'll give it a name. So let's just give it dashboard so we know it's dashboard. Again, do the exact same thing for the rest of them. Okay, so once you've put a H1 in all of them, the next thing you want to do is to import them into the app.jsx file. So just to make this tutorial easier for you guys, I'm going to change this to word wrap. All right, cool. Okay, cool. So once you've done that, the next thing we want to do is to create a new folder and call it components. Components. In components, we want to create just the one called sidebar.jsx. Go into the React arrow function, and we'll just leave it as blank for now. So just leave it as it is. And we'll go back into the app.jsx file, and we also want to import that. Perfect. All right, cool. So once you've done all of that, the next thing we want to do is to integrate the React Router DOM into the application. So in order to do that, we want to create a parent called router. which will wrap around the entire tag. We'll just put it here, save it for now. Cool. And then inside app, we want the sidebar that we added to remain in the same spot regardless of which page we change. So we'll put that here. And then for each route, we want to have a route as the parent. And for each route, we want the path to equal a specific page. So the first one will be the main page. And the element for that will be the dashboard. All right, perfect. So it appears that the dashboard is appearing, which is exactly what we had in here. So we just had a H1 tag called dashboard, which means it's working. So the next path we want is news. So we'll put in news. So now if we come over to our local host here, if we go /news, it'll come up with the news. And that's exactly what we want for this to happen. And all we have to do now is just copy and paste this and do this for the rest of the pages that we have. All right, perfect. So once we've done all the routes, the next thing we're going to do is to style the route pages up themselves, since there won't be too much to this. So if we come down to our styles, go into our main.scss file. Under the body, let's make the overflow, or set the overflow to hidden. And we want the height to be 100 vertical height, and also the width to be 100 vertical width. And since each title is a H1 tag, I'm going to set the width again to 100 vertical W, and also the height to 100 VH. And then set a display flex, align item center, specify content to center as well. And that should place it in the center there. Another thing that we want is to set the font family to font family. And again, the reason that I've got this is because it's being imported from the variables file. And if we go to font family, we have it set to this here. So essentially this $sign picks up a variable that I've created here and can be reused multiple times. So that's why I'm using that. So if I save that, it should change it. Yeah, that's working. And then we also want to set the background color to a very light green. Another thing that we can add is just set the text transform to capitalize, just so all the different titles are capitalized, so we know which page we're on. Okay, let's test this out. Let's go into settings. Perfect, that works. Let's try another one. Let's put in news, for example. Okay, it appears that it is working the way that we want. So let's just get back into the dashboard. Perfect. The next step from this point is to work on the sidebar. So now that we're in the sidebar, let's just make sure that we can actually see it on the app itself. So let's put in a H2, just say hello. Okay, cool. It's appearing there, which means it's working. Fantastic. So the next step is to import all these images here. But since I want this to be done a lot faster for YouTube, you can find this on my GitHub repository, which is in the link in the description. So I'm just going to copy them across and paste them down here. Fantastic. So the first thing we want to do is give it a class name of sidebar, and this will be changed later in the video, but just for this part of the tutorial, we'll call it sidebar. The first thing is to create the logo itself. So let's call logo container. And since this is the open state and this is a closed state, we will have to give the title some sort of span or somehow separate them. So in order to do that, we'll just create two divs under this logo container. So the first one will be logo, and the source for this will be the icon here. We'll just call it icon, save that. Hopefully that's appearing. Yeah, that's in the app itself. And then we also want to put in, let's put in a H2, call it title, and we'll just name it evergreen, exactly as it is in the Figma file here. Fantastic. The next one we have is this burger menu. So let's call it burger container, burger trigger as the trigger. And then we also want another one called burger menu, which will change as we click on it. Next one we want is a profile container. We want an image with profile. And as the source, just copy this here. Put in profile. And we'll just call it profile like that. All right, cool. The next thing we want are the profile contents. So then under the profile contents, we want to copy this here. So name, hello John, and then also another one with the email itself. So we'll just copy the email there and just paste it in there. That's looking good. All right, cool. So now that we have the profile container, the burger container, and the logo container, the next one is getting this part here. So in order to do that, we'll call it contents container. And we want to create an unordered list. And for each list item, have an A tag. So the first one will be the dashboard. So the slash, which is what we created before in the app.jsx file. So this slash here is the path. And we just want to call it dashboard. We'll do that now. So dashboard, dashboard. And we also want an image behind it and give it a source of this one here, dashboard. And we'll just call it dashboard. Just like that. And all we need to do now is just copy and paste these. Perfect. So I think that's everything. So what we have now are the contents container, the profile container, the burger container, as well as the logo container, which is this one here. And since we've done that, we are ready to start styling it. So the next thing you want to do is come into your main.scss file here. Just to make our lives easier, I'm going to open up the element inspector. Just drag this out so we can actually see it better. All right, cool. Go into sidebar here. And what we want to do is with the sidebar, we want to set the background color to a white color. We want to set the position to absolute, and we want to set the top to 0 as well as the left to 0 like that, so that now it's in the corner. And then we also want to give it a padding to the top of, let's do 2 rem and 0 for the sides. All right, that's starting to look good. The next thing is the logo container. So the logo container, we want to set it as a flex. So go display flex. We also want to align items to center, justify content to center. So with the title itself, go into h2.title, and I'm just going to check the size that I had. Yeah, so 31.42. Font size 31.42 pixels. We'll save that. Set the color to green. Yeah, that's starting to look good. And I might also increase the width to 15 rem. Another thing we could do is set the height to 100 vertical height, since the sidebar is expanding from the top to the bottom of the screen. All right, that's starting to look cool. The padding itself, just set the top, right, bottom to 0, and we'll have 1 rem for the other side. That should expand it out a bit like that. So if I come out of here, I still feel like we need to give it some padding. So let's just give it 1 rem for the left and right. Actually, no, let's give it maybe even 3 rem. Yeah, 3 rem. I think that, yeah, that looks a lot better, I reckon. All right, cool. Okay, so once we've done the logo, the next thing we want to do is the profile container. I mean, we could do the burger container, but I'll get into that in a second. So we'll just go into profile container. I'm going to set it as a display of flex. We want to align the items to center, justify content to center as well. And the image itself, we want to decrease the size of it. So if you set the width to auto and then the height to something like 3 rem, the width should stay quite versatile and it shouldn't impact the way it looks too much. So that looks proportionally correct. And then we'll work with the fonts themselves. So go into profile, contents, and under there we had ap.name class. We'll set the padding to 0 and the margin as well to 0. We'll set the font size to, what size was that? 16.77 pixels. All right. And we'll set the color to a dark gray. There we go. It's starting to look good. And then the other P tag, we'll set again the padding to 0, margin to 0. Set the font size to 13.9 pixels. Again, we'll set the color to dark gray as well. Text, trans, lowercase, capitalize. So once we've done that, let me just check. Okay, so the font of this was actually a bold. So just check the variable I called it. Yeah, heavy font. So this one here, call it heavy font. Yeah, that's looking good. And we want, instead of doing center, actually, I've changed my mind. Let's change it to flex start so that everything is aligned with this padding here and nicely balanced. And then we want to add some padding to the left side. So just do something like this so that this is pushed away from that. Okay, that's starting to look quite nice. What I might do is come back to the profile container and I'm going to add some padding to the top just so there's some room to breathe for the burger menu, maybe even like 2.5 rem. Maybe even 3. We'll work with 3 for now and just see what happens. All right, cool. So once you've done that, the next thing we want to do is to create the burger container, which will be found between the logo as well as the profile here. And again, it's got an open state as well as a closed state. So we'll have to keep that in mind when making this part. All right, cool. So in between logo container and profile container, we'll put in our burger container. So type that up. I want to set the content of that to nothing. We also want to set the background color to a green. We want to set the position to absolute. We want to set the right to something like, let's start with -35 pixels divided by 2. And then the top, let's calculate it as being 9 rem divided by 1.15. And then we can also set a width of it to 35 pixels, a height of 35 pixels as well. We also want to create a border radius for that, something like 2 rem, so it's a full circle. And then finally, we'll set a Z index of 1 to begin with. So hopefully that's appearing. I'll just open this up slightly. Yeah, there it is. So we've got this burger menu just here, and that's starting to look quite cool. So once we've done the burger container, the next thing we want to do is the burger trigger, which is this one here. So this will actually activate and give it functionality when we click on it. So let's set the content to nothing again. Again, the width and height will be the exact same. So I'm just going to copy those across. Just save that. We also want to set the background color to, I don't know, let's do a red just so we can see what it looks like. We want the cursor to be a pointer since this is the trigger itself. There it is, it's saying to appear. Let's give it a Z index of 2. And then we also want to change the opacity to 0. just so that we can't see it, but if a user were to put their cursor on it, they're able to click it. And there you go. We've got the trigger working and it's over the top of the burger container. So once you've done your trigger, the next thing is the burger menu. So just put in burger menu and in here, set the content to nothing. We also want the background color to be a green. We also want to set the background color to white. We also want the position set to relative. Z index of 1. We also want the width to be about 20 pixels, the height to be roughly 3 pixels. Give it some border radius, just so it's a bit softer and less harsh on the edges. We want to set the bottom to give it a calculation of the height divided by 2. And then we also want to set the left to 0.45 rem. And let's see how that's looking. All right, cool. So we've got the first stroke. Now we want the other two to formulate and create the full burger picture. So let's go burger, menu, :, after. And in here, we want to set the content to nothing. The background color again to white. The position this time to absolute so we can move it freely. We want to set the width to something like 20 pixels, the height to about 3 pixels. Set the border radius to about 2 rem, so it's less harsh on the edges. Then the top, let's do something like 0.4 rem away from the original stroke. And let's see how that looks. Cool, that's starting to look really nice. And what we want to do next is to copy this, change it to before. And we want to set the top to negative 0.4 rem. So it goes in the opposite direction. That's starting to look really cool. Now, in the closed state, that's how the burger looks. So what we want to do is to change it to a state so that it has the X, and that's what I'm going to do now. So in order to do that, change this to green so it blends into the background. We also want to create a transformation. So translate Y by, I don't know, something like the top value here, so 0.4 rem. And we also want to rotate it by about 45 degrees. Actually, no, do the opposite, negative 0.4 rem. And then do the exact same thing. Save that. But instead of that, change it to a negative. All right, cool. So now it's like this X. All right, that's starting to look quite nice. So once we've got our burger menu, there's also this really cool looking stroke here that we can add. So in order to do that, what you want to do is come down to the burger container itself. So type in burger container. So just type in burger container, : after. And in here, we want to set the content again to nothing. Set the position to absolute. We want to set the right value to the width of this. So the width of this was 35 pixels. So we'll just add that in there, just so it doesn't overlap with the actual circle itself. And then we want to also set the top to half of the height, which was 35 pixels again. So we'll just do that there. I'm going to set the Z index to 0. Set the width to calculation of something like 8 rem plus 15 rem. So the padding on the sides plus the width itself. So if I just go back to here, so yeah, the width is 15 rem. So we've got 15 rem. And then the padding is 3 on the left and right. So instead of 8, let's put in 6. Let's see how that looks. It's not appearing since we haven't given it a background color yet. So we'll give it a background color of light gray perhaps. And we'll give the height something like 2 pixels. All right, that's looking really good. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to work on the contents container, which is this part here. So all you got to do is come here, type in contents container. Once we've typed that in, the next thing we're going to do is to adjust the spacing between the profile container and the contents itself. So let's give it a margin to the top of something like 2 rem. That should push it down a bit. That looks good. With the unordered list, so this one here, we want to set the display to flex, align items to flex start, so everything is fixed along this left padding here. We want to justify the content to space between. We want to set the flex direction to a column so it runs from top to bottom. We also want to get rid of these bullet points here. So in order to do that, just set the list style to none. So this will remove the bullet points. That's looking good. We want to set the padding to 0 as well as the margin to 0 so that everything is now aligned. Okay, that's starting to look really nice. The next thing we want to do is in the LI. So for each list itself, we want to adjust these accordingly. So let's set it to flex, align the items to flex start. So everything again is aligned to this left padding here. I'm going to justify the content to, I don't know, something like space between. Again, set the flex direction to columns. Everything goes from top to bottom. Let's set the margin to something like 0.75 rem for the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Do the exact same thing for the padding itself. And then again, set the width to 100%. We also want to set the border radius to something like 1 rem. And we'll see how that looks. Actually, I changed my mind. I've noticed that the image is on the top of here. So we'll change it to row. Instead of flex start, I'm going to go center and then justify content to flex start. So now everything is in the middle and aligned to the left side. Okay, that's starting to look really nice. The next thing I want to do is with each image, I want to give it a padding so that the right side pushes the content away from it like that. And then with the A tag itself, I'm going to set the text decoration to none. So we get rid of this underline. We also want to set the color to something like a dark gray, I believe, by looking here. Yep, dark gray. We also want to set the font size to something like 20 pixels. Yeah, that looks good. Then we also want to set the display to flex, align items to center, justify content to space between. And finally, we want to set the margin to something like 0.5 rem for the left side. See how that looks. So now if I come into here, if I were to click on transactions, it'll take me to the transactions page. If I go to something like the news, it'll take me to the news and so forth. The next thing that we want to do is to give it some functionality. And if you notice in the Figma file, we have both an open and a closed state like this one here. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. So what we want to do is open up the inspect page here, and we'll be able to play it in here whilst also adjusting the styling here. All right, cool. I'm going to come into the sidebar and put in a new class for active. So what we can do now is type in sidebar.active. So that's our second class. And give it a new width of something like 3 rem, just for the time being. And then under here, we can go into our logo container and give it a new class of active again. So with the logo container.active, we want to give the h2.title the opacity of 0. That should disappear. This logo, let's see why. That's why flex start. Actually, no, flex start. That's why. Okay, my bad. So what we want to do is come back to the sidebar, go into the logo container, and instead of center for the justify content, we want to set it to flex start. All right, cool. So that should work now. Okay, that's starting to look really nice with that adjustment. the next thing we want to do is to fix the burger state so that it looks like this icon here. So in order to do that, what we can do is come into the burger container.active, and we also want to give it an active class. And let's set the burger menu itself so that the background color of that stroke is set to white and we can see it clearly. Perfect. We also want to set the before to have a transform translate y of 0 rem, and we also want to rotate it back to 0 degrees to where it was before. All right, cool. So that's in the spot that we want. We copy and paste this, change this to after, do the exact same thing again, translate y to 0 rem and rotate to 0 degrees, and now it's back to where it was. So now if we change this from its default state to its active state, the burger changes to the way that we want it to. And that's starting to look really good. Okay, and then once we've done that, next thing is to work with the profile container. So we'll just go into our profile container. And all we really want to do for this is adjust the profile contents here. So all we have to do now is just go profile contents, give it an opacity of something like 0, for example, so that it disappears. I've noticed that this is not quite aligned with this. See how it's slightly overlapping. So in order to fix that, I'm going to go back to the image that we had. Should be in here. And instead of 3.5 rem, I'm going to give it 3 rem. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Or maybe something like 3.25. No. I'm going to give it 3 rem. Yep, that looks a lot better, a lot cleaner. Perfect. Cool. So once you've done the profile contents, the next thing is the actual contents container itself. So we'll just go contents container. Opacity of 0. All right, cool. That's starting to look good. Another thing I've noticed is that the icons here aren't lined up with this. So I'm going to quickly fix that. So if we go back into, let's have a look. So we go back into the contents container, and then if we scroll down to our image here, what we can do is we can give it a padding of something like 0.5 rem from the left. So that should drag it out a bit. Yeah, so now it's nice and balanced. And if we were to refresh, yeah, that's starting to look really nice. So now all the icons are balanced and are aligned centered. And then we also have these nice subheadings for each icon here. Perfect. So if we go back to the design, you'll notice that it has this highlighted section which tells you which page you're on. So I'm going to add that in now. So what I might do is I'll go back to the sidebar and I will give this value here, this li value, a class name of active. So we know that's the active one. So if we go back to our contents container, the li, and we're going to create a new one called active. And we're going to give it a background color of very light green. And we want to set the A tag to a color of green as well. So now this is highlighted and that looks really, really nice. Another thing we can add is a hover state. So let's put in li:hover. So each time we hover over an element, we want to give it a background color of something like dark gray. So let's see how that looks. So that's too dark. So let's do maybe a light gray instead. Yeah, that looks a lot better, much cleaner, easier to read as well. And we may as well give it a transition of something like 0.25 seconds for all. See how that looks. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So now that we've finished off the styling for both the active and non-active states, the next part is to work with the functionality using various different hooks and states. So the first state, or rather hook that we're going to use, is the most commonly used one called Usestate. So we'll just add that in there. And another one we'll also use is something called Uselocation, which is part of the React Router DOM. So this will be really useful in determining which page we're on and activating different functions for when that is used. So the first constant that we can use is something called location, and we're going to use that under the Uselocation hook. So we use that. And then the other one that we're going to use is we want to create a state for the menu being whether it's closed or open. So we'll call it closed menu. We also want to set a closed menu, and we want to equal that to Usestate as a Boolean value of false to start with. So what we can do is if we go back to our inspect element, I'll just drag this out, come to the console. So if I console log the closed menu, it should say false, which is it does here. So this can be manipulated, and by manipulating it, it will activate the active states that we created before using our SASS. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to create a function so that we can play with the active state to change it from true to false. So we want to create something called handle close menu, and we're going to equal that to an arrow function. And we will use this function inside here and set the closed menu to the opposite value to what it is currently. So this value here, and the way I've written it, is used so that it works as a toggle as opposed to just doing it once. So this can be constantly changed from true to false as many times as you want, which can become very useful in a situation like this. All right, cool. So once we've written up these constants, the next thing we want to do is to create arguments for the class names. So for example, if close menu is the same as false, which we've written it here as being, then we want it to be called sidebar. Otherwise, if it's set to true, we want it to be called sidebar active, right? So now if we come to the use state and change this value to true, it should go into the state that we created before. And if we go into false, we'll go back to the value that we had it before. All right, cool. So that's working the way that we want it to. The next thing is to start doing it for the rest of the classes. So if close menu is the same as false, then have it set to logo container. Otherwise, if it's set to true, we want to give it a second class of active. And what we can do is we can copy this for the rest of the items where we've added in an active class for the styling. So we did one for the burger container, burger container active. I did one for the profile container as well. We'll just copy this. Profile container. And just copy that into there. Have one for contents container. So contents container. And that should work. So now if I go into true, everything changes to the state that we created beforehand. If we go to false, same thing happens. Perfect. So that's starting to look really, really good. Another thing that we can do is when we click on this burger trigger here, we want the use state of this value to be changed back to true and to also go back to false when we click it again. So in order to do that, what we want to do is to come over to the burger trigger, which is this one here. And we want to add in something called onClick equals, and we want to give it an arrow function like so. And inside of that arrow function, we want to copy this function here, paste it inside here. so that when we click on it, it should fire it so that it goes back to the menu that we had it at. So now that's looking quite good. An issue that I'm noticing is that the burger trigger is underneath these strokes here. So in order to fix that, I may have forgotten something. Yes, I did. I forgot to add a value of relative, and I'll change the Z index to something like 6. And hopefully, yeah, that works now. Another thing as well, the LI should be a pointer. So if we go into our LI, give it a cursor of pointer. So now each one has a cursor, just like that. Another thing is I want to add in some transitions so that animation looks a lot smoother as opposed to being as static as it is. So in order to do that, what we can do is for each item that changes, we can add in a transition. So for example, let's add in a transition for the burger menu, something like 0.5 seconds all. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it into each area where I want more of an animation to occur. We can do it perhaps into here as well. Why not put it in the sidebar itself? The sidebar as well as the active state. The active state of burger menu and the strokes themselves and the container itself. So now let's see how this looks. That looks much cleaner. Again, you can continue to add in more transitions if you want, but for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, cool. So the final thing that we want to be able to do is if we were to change to a page to something like transactions, for example, we want this value here to change so that transactions becomes the active value. So in order to do that, we need to go back to the sidebar, and that's where the const location, Uselocation comes from. It's quite simple to do, but basically, because we've called it location, all you need to do is to find the li items which are being changed, which are these ones here. And all you have to type in is if location.pathname is the same as the href, which is this value here. And the value that we determined in the React router part in the app.jsx file, then we want to give it an active state to the class name. Otherwise, we want it to be blank so that if we were to change to a different page, the active state of this changes to nothing. So for example, if I were to go into transactions, this should disappear. Yeah, it disappears. And if I go back to it, it reappears. So basically, we're going to copy this line of code and do it for the rest of the items that we have. I'll just save that. Perfect. So now let's see how it looks. It closes, it opens. If I change to a different page, so for example, transactions, this active state of dashboard should change. So if I go in the inspect element, come over here, we can see that it's set to active. But if I come over to transactions, click on that, it's now set to active. And the active state of this class is removed. So pretty much anytime I go to a new page, it changes. And if I close it, we have this nice looking animation. So that's basically the tutorial. I hope you guys learned something. If you do have any questions, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. And I will catch you in the next video. See you later.